This is Rick Rule for Rule Investment Media, sponsors of the Natural Resource Investment Symposium, held July 7 through 11 in Boca Raton, Florida. Whether you attend live in Boca Raton or in live stream from the comfort and convenience of your own home, please note that we're going to deliver between 50 and 60 hours of programming over 4 days, more than you can easily absorb. To that end, recordings of the conference will be available so that you can replay the conference. To that end, too, every exhibitor and every speaker in the conference is going to be interviewed before the conference, with those interviews posted. The idea is to give you the ability to understand the value proposition of the exhibitors before the conference so that you can allocate your time and ultimately your capital more productively. Note, too, that every exhibitor at this conference is vetted. Specifically, every single public company exhibitor at the conference is owned in my accounts or in accounts managed by me. There's no guarantee that because I buy a stock, it goes up. But there is a guarantee that unlike any other investment conference that I'm aware of on the planet, each exhibitor is vetted by the conference sponsors. As part of this process today, I'm delighted to interview Keith Barron, a serially successful public company explorer, primarily in the mining business and primarily in South America. Keith, welcome. Thank you for your efforts on behalf of shareholders over time, particularly me. And thank you, too, for your ongoing support of the Natural Resources Investment Symposium.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be a part of this.
Let's talk about your prior success, the Fruta del Norte success. Talk to us about the genesis of that success and how you came to make that striking discovery, and also, of course, the outcome for your shareholders.
Well, I started that company funding it out of my hip pocket for the first 3 years, started in 2001, and came up with a massive discovery of gold in 2006. Sold it on to Kinross for $1.2 billion Canadian, incredible amount of money. They decided they weren't going to develop it. They handed it on to Lundin Gold, and now it's one of the richest operating gold mines anywhere in the world. It's producing over 400,000 ounces of gold every year at around, I think, about 10 grams per ton. It was an incredible win for the shareholders. The shares went from 30 cents to $43. I believe that's something like 9,000%. And I'm trying to do it again. I'm back in Ecuador, have been there for a number of years now. We're into year 7 of our exploration in a big, big block, which is 500,000 acres. It's twice the size of what we had back in the old days. And it's on strike. So it's on trend with what was found before. And in the course of this exploration that we've been doing, we've been finding all kinds of different targets: gold targets, copper targets, lead, zinc, silver, a virtual a virtual treasure box, really, of different metal scenarios.
Tell our audience about the genesis of this idea. Tell us how you came to look particularly for this style of gold deposits, and tell us the various sources of information that you accessed while researching this. It's a fascinating story.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I first went to Ecuador in 98 to learn Spanish, to improve my Spanish. I ended up billeted with a professor of history who had been working for the mines department. Very odd job, but he did this because there had been a mine discovered in 1981 by two boys hunting wild pigs out in the forest. It had been a mine of the conquistadors. It ended up producing on the record 2.7 million ounces of gold. And that's what's on the record. Probably a lot more than that went under the table. So he said to me at the time, he said, Keith, there were 7 famous mines in Ecuador. 5 of them have been relocated over time, but 2 of them are still missing. And of course, I had to say to them, do you know where they are? And he said, yes, I have a pretty good idea. So we started the company back in 2001. We actually made a discovery in the field within the first month, and then the whole thing kind of took a right-hand turn. Instead of concentrating on the historical stuff, we concentrated on that and ended up with Fruta del Norte. But the search led us after Aurelian had been bought out. Went back to do more research. Ended up in the Vatican Library, finding a document from 1628, a whole bunch of stuff in the Archive of the Indies in Spain, and that's really what's led us to where we are now. Um, and we found a lot of stuff that really the Spaniards could never ever of contemplated.
I guess it was that search, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second, that led you to the idea of a red bed or oxidized copper silver belt. Could you talk to us a bit about that? This is real frontier exploration, but real frontier exploration are how tier one discoveries are made.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's what happened. So the boys out in the field one day they came back with a slab of rock which weighed about 120 pounds, and some person had carried it out on their back. I don't know how they managed it, but it was full of copper and silver. And when we analyzed it, it had about 8-9% copper in it, about 300 grams per ton silver. And I asked him where this stuff came from, obviously, and that developed into a brand new target that has never ever been seen in Ecuador before. Sediment hosted copper silver, very much geologically like Friedland is mining in the Congo right now. Very exciting. It goes for 22 kilometers across country.
So I've long told the students in the Rule classroom that money is made in exploration for shareholders, value is added by answering unanswered questions. That really exploration is a research and development business. And by applying knowledge to a project, testing a thesis, you answer unanswered questions. If you could talk to me about the unanswered questions that you're proposing to answer in the next 12 to 18 months, some people might phrase the question as a catalyst, but that's a bit stocky. So if you could talk about how you're adding value to the market's knowledge around both the gold discovery process and the copper discovery process, that would be helpful to our listeners.
Okay. Well, essentially, when we acquired this property, it's massive. As I said, 500,000 acres. It was almost a blank slate. We had the historical information, which was kind of touchy-feely, as you can imagine. No GPSs back then, and not much else to go on. But we did by the book exploration, stream sediments, geophysical work. Flying helicopters over the property, et cetera, and came up with a number of targets. And it's a process. You work through these targets. Some of them fall off the table, some of them don't, and they work their way up the ladder into drill targets. And now we're at a situation where a lot of the heavy lifting has been done, a lot of the money has been spent on the regional exploration, and now it's down to not a handful of targets, I would say a double handful of targets. And these things have to be systematically drilled. So we have porphyry copper targets, much like our neighbors who are actually close to development. We have this copper silver in sediments. We have some beautiful looking epithermal gold targets, which in many ways resemble Fruta del Norte. And then we have lead zinc silver, which is also a little bit unique for the area and never seen before, but high grade silver. And I know you love silver.
I'm actually agnostic as to how I make my money, Keith. If you were to discover a world-class sand and gravel deposit where you could deliver the material to a market, I'd be on it like white on rice. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this targeting procedure. My understanding is that the original thesis was developed, as you would suggest, via history and data that had been overlooked for centuries. My suspicion is that if you're dealing with a land spread that exceeds 500,000 acres, that there needed to be some sort of remote sensing tool. I don't know if you flew geophysics or what you did. And then I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you had to ground truth all of these things. Tell us something about the targets that you're most excited about that you've developed as a consequence of 6 or 7 years of ground truthing in the jungle.
Yeah. Well, you got to appreciate that this is heavy jungle. It's kind of like Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now. And I've had crews there going upriver, taking stream sediments. First, we flew the whole property geophysically and got a whole bunch of targets that way. But there are a lot of things that are very subtle and they just don't show up that way. Fruta del Norte was a target that really had a very, very subtle, almost imperceptible geophysical signature. The way that was found was by good old geochemistry. It was an arsenic, antimony, and mercury anomaly in soils and in rocks, and we found the same sort of thing, almost like a copycat now. But you don't find a lot of gold on the surface. You have to drill these things. So we're very excited about a couple of targets. One of which is called a Wacha. A Wacha is not just one target; it's a cluster of porphyry targets, which extends for about 11 kilometers. We don't know the full extent or how many targets, how many porphyries are in there. We know that there's at least several. So we're going to be doing some more geological mapping on that and firming that up for drilling. Also, we're going to be, in the near term, going back to one of our gold targets called Curiaowi and getting that readied up for drilling. And we're doing a financing right now. We expect that'll raise enough money that we can put 3 or 4 holes into the thing and get a look, see what's going on under the ground. This is obviously, they call it the truth machine. You can have lots and lots of ideas, but at the end of the day, you got to drill the thing and see what the gold contents are in the core.
Drilling permits can be tough to get in the protected reaches of the Amazon and the eastern flanks of the Andes. Are you reasonably confident that your relations with the Ecuadorian government are good enough, or your relationship with the indigenous peoples in this 500,000 acres, that you'll be able to drill the targets that you develop?
Oh yes, yes, and we've been working with the indigenous people. They're called the Shuar. We've been working them since project inception. In fact, over time, we've hired more than 4,000 individuals. Some of them have only worked for a day. Some of them have worked for months for us. But we have an extremely good relationship with them, and through the pandemic, we helped them out. We gave them actually 18 tons of dried food, pasta and rice, stuff like that, to carry them through because they couldn't get to the stores. So we really have social license to operate where we are. As you're probably aware, the government of Ecuador changed in December.
Mhm.
The new president, Daniel Noboa, has an acceptance rating of 81%. I don't think there's been a US president who's had an acceptance rating of 81% ever. But this guy's got very tough on crime, but he's also very, very pro mining. And he has some very proactive people for a change in the environmental department, in the environmental ministry, and fast tracking the process to get the permits and get on the ground and get drilling. It's taking about a month. But gosh, where I'm from in Canada, it takes a lot longer than that. So this is a real improvement.
Keith, if our attendees would like to hear more about what you're doing in Ecuador, who is the company spokesperson and how might they reach that person?
Well, they can reach me directly, and my email is Keith, Keith, at Aurania, Aurania.com. If I'm not around or I don't respond right away, I could be in the field. So get a hold of Carolyn at Aurania.com, and her spelling is Carolyn.
Keith, thank you for a couple decades of activity on support of shareholders. Especially thank you for your activity in support of me. And thank you, too, for your support of the Natural Resources Investment Symposium. I look forward to hosting you in Boca Raton.
I'm going to make all you folks a lot more money. That's a promise.